Why do some countries soar while others sink? Take South Korea and North Korea, two nations that shared the same land, the same people, and the same history. Yet today, South Korea is an economic powerhouse, home to global giants like Samsung and Hyundai, while North Korea remains trapped in poverty and dictatorship. Or look at the US and Latin America. The US dominates the global economy, leading in technology and wealth creation, while much of Latin America struggles with instability and underdevelopment. So what makes the difference? Is it geography, natural resources, culture? What if the biggest reason some nations stay poor has nothing to do with resources, geography, or even intelligence? What if it's something hidden beneath the surface? Something that silently shapes economies, controls opportunities, and determines who thrives and who struggles. Take two countries with the same potential. One skyrockets to wealth and innovation, while the other stagnates in poverty. Why does this happen? What force is at play deciding the fate of entire nations? As we break it all down, you'll see patterns emerge, patterns that explain why some countries build lasting prosperity while others remain trapped in cycles of failure. And once you recognize it, you'll never look at global wealth the same way again. But even when some nations try to break free, they face another challenge: brain drain. Every year, thousands of skilled professionals from developing countries leave for better opportunities abroad, making it even harder for their home nations to catch up. So, if some countries have escaped poverty, why do others stay trapped? Is there a way out? Or is the global economic divide permanent? Why do some nations build lasting prosperity while others remain trapped in cycles of poverty? As stated by economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, a nation's success isn't determined by geography, culture, or natural resources. It all comes down to the strength of its institutions. Nations that thrive have what Acemoglu and Robinson call inclusive institutions, economic and political systems that protect property rights, encourage entrepreneurship, and create fair competition. These institutions incentivize innovation, allowing businesses to take risks, invest in new technologies, and fuel economic growth. A country that rewards effort instead of suppressing it builds a foundation for long-term prosperity. But not every nation follows this path. In extractive institutions, power and wealth are hoarded by an elite few who use the system to benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. Instead of competition, you get monopolies. Instead of innovation, you get corruption. And instead of economic mobility, you get a permanent underclass. Few examples illustrate this divide better than the Korean Peninsula. In the 1950s, South Korea and North Korea were nearly identical. Same geography, same people, same war-torn ruins. But today, South Korea is the 13th largest economy in the world, while North Korea is one of the most impoverished and isolated nations on the planet. Why? Because South Korea embraced inclusive institutions, while North Korea remained trapped in an extractive system. South Korea established strong property rights, open markets, and democratic governance. Its government invested in education, encouraged industrialization, and allowed businesses to thrive. Today, companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG drive its economy. North Korea, on the other hand, took the opposite path. Power is concentrated in the hands of a dictator. Markets are controlled by the state, and resources are funneled into the ruling elite instead of the people. The result? Widespread poverty, stagnant growth, and total economic dependence on foreign aid. A similar contrast can be seen between the United States and much of Latin America. The US became an economic superpower not just because of its resources, but because of its institutions. Its constitution protected private property, enforced contracts, and allowed businesses to operate freely. The rule of law ensured that political power changed hands peacefully, allowing for stability and long-term growth. Latin America, however, faced a different fate. Many of its countries were shaped by colonial-era extractive institutions that concentrated wealth among elites. Decades of political instability, corruption, and weak property rights stifled entrepreneurship and foreign investment. Even today, countries like Venezuela, Argentina, and Mexico struggle with economic stagnation due to unstable governance and corrupt leadership. At the end of the day, prosperity isn't an accident, it's a choice. A nation that builds inclusive institutions creates opportunity, innovation, and sustainable growth. A nation that clings to extractive institutions condemns itself to poverty, corruption, and instability. So, when we ask why some nations stay poor while others thrive, the answer isn't just in history books. It's in the decisions their leaders make every day. Imagine trying to build a business in a country where the government can take your assets at any time, where corruption determines success more than innovation, and where wealth is hoarded by a small elite while the majority struggles. This is the reality of extractive institutions, systems that don't just fail to promote economic growth, but actively destroy it. A study by economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson highlights that one of the biggest killers of innovation is the absence of strong property rights. In extractive economies, businesses hesitate to invest because they have no guarantee that their profits or assets will be protected. If you can't trust that what you build is yours, why would you take the risk? Instead of competition and investment, you get stagnation and decay. And it doesn't stop there. Transparency International has consistently found that corrupt institutions prioritize personal gain over national development. Instead of reinvesting wealth into infrastructure, education, or healthcare, corrupt elites funnel resources into offshore accounts, luxury projects, and personal power. The result? A system that keeps the rich in control and the poor permanently locked out. Few nations illustrate the dangers of extractive institutions better than Venezuela. Once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, Venezuela was sitting on one of the world's largest oil reserves. But instead of using that wealth to diversify its economy, invest in infrastructure, or create industries, the government centralized control over oil revenues, mismanaged funds, and turned the economy into a state-run monopoly. As reported by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Venezuela's collapse wasn't a result of lacking resources, but rather corrupt policies that funneled oil wealth into the hands of government elites while disregarding economic stability. Hyperinflation, food shortages, and mass unemployment followed, forcing millions of Venezuelans to flee the country. Unlike Venezuela, Mexico has made significant economic reforms. It has opened up markets, increased trade, and modernized industries. Yet despite this progress, Mexico's economic growth is still held back by weak institutions. A report from MIT's Economic Review states that corruption, weak law enforcement, and a lack of accountability are major obstacles preventing Mexico from reaching its full economic potential. While companies may technically have the right to operate freely, the reality is different. Legal protections are inconsistent, businesses must navigate bribery and bureaucratic inefficiencies, and criminal organizations have significant influence over local economies. Extractive institutions don't just slow growth, they trap nations in cycles of poverty and stagnation. When governments focus on consolidating power instead of empowering their people, innovation dies, corruption thrives, and economic progress remains an illusion. If a country wants to break free from poverty, the first step isn't wealth or resources, it's dismantling extractive institutions before they destroy the economy from within. If extractive institutions are a roadmap to failure, then inclusive institutions are the blueprint for success. Nations that protect property rights, encourage innovation, and enforce fair governance create the conditions for economic prosperity. As highlighted by Darren Acemoglu and his research team, inclusive institutions foster long-term economic growth by prioritizing productivity over privilege. When a country guarantees property rights, entrepreneurs are more willing to invest in businesses and technology. When it supports innovation, new industries emerge. And when it ensures fair governance, corruption and monopolies are kept in check. No place embodies the impact of inclusive institutions better than Silicon Valley. The US became a global technology leader not because of natural resources, but because of strong intellectual property laws, access to capital, and a culture of competition. The Harvard Business Review points out that Silicon Valley's success was rooted in institutions that protected patents, promoted venture capital investment, and maintained a stable regulatory environment. Entrepreneurs knew that if they developed groundbreaking technology, they could profit from it without fear of expropriation or government interference. That's why companies like Apple, Google, and Tesla emerged, not because the US had more engineers than other countries, but because it had the right institutional framework to let them succeed. Japan's rise from post-war devastation to economic superpower wasn't luck. It was institutional strategy. After World War II, Japan's government implemented policies that encouraged competition, protected businesses from unnecessary bureaucracy, and invested in high-tech industries. A World Bank report highlights that Japan's government was instrumental in creating a pro-business environment while maintaining market fairness. It prioritized education, research, and manufacturing innovation, allowing companies like Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic to thrive on a global scale. At the core of every successful economy are institutions that empower people instead of restricting them. Countries that protect businesses, reward innovation, and maintain fair governance experience long-term prosperity. Those that don't, they fall behind. So when people ask why some nations stay poor while others thrive, the answer isn't a mystery. It's in the rules they play by. If strong institutions are the key to economic success, then why do some nations with relatively good governance still struggle? While inclusive institutions create the foundation for growth, they are not a silver bullet. Economic success depends on a mix of historical context, social stability, and the ability to implement reforms effectively. Take South Africa, a country with a democratic government, independent judiciary, and legal protections for businesses. According to Transparency International, South Africa ranks higher than many developing nations in governance and institutional integrity. But despite these advantages, the country still battles high unemployment, slow economic growth, and persistent inequality. Why? Because institutional reform alone isn't enough if economic power remains concentrated in the hands of a few, or if political instability discourages investment. A similar struggle can be seen in post-Soviet states like Ukraine and Kazakhstan. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, these nations introduced market reforms, privatization, and stronger legal frameworks. Yet, according to the World Bank, many of these nations still face weak economic performance due to corruption, oligarchic control of industries, and political instability. What happens when a country's best and brightest leave for better opportunities abroad? Economists call it brain drain, the large-scale migration of highly skilled workers from developing nations to richer countries. Investopedia explains that brain drain depletes a country's workforce, hinders economic growth, and exacerbates inequality. But why do talented professionals leave in the first place? The answer lies in three powerful forces. 1. Higher salaries abroad. For many professionals, the decision to leave their home country is an economic one. According to the U.S. labor market report, skilled workers in developing nations earn a fraction of what they would make in wealthier countries. A doctor in Nigeria, for example, may earn less than $5,000 a year, while the same position in the U.S. pays over $200,000 annually. Second, better living conditions and career growth. Beyond salaries, many skilled workers seek political stability, quality healthcare, and better career prospects. The OECD reports that countries like the US, Canada, and Germany offer stronger social safety nets, cutting-edge technology, and better research opportunities. For a scientist in India or a software engineer in China, working in Silicon Valley or London means access to world-class facilities and global networking. 3. Corruption and instability in home countries. Even when wages and career growth improve at home, many professionals flee corruption and political instability. Transparency International has found that in many developing nations, bribery, lack of merit-based hiring, and political interference make it nearly impossible for skilled workers to thrive. Why stay in a system where advancement depends on connections, not competence? Case study: African doctors moving to the US and Europe. Nowhere is brain drain more devastating than in Africa's healthcare sector. Despite producing thousands of highly trained doctors, many African nations face severe doctor shortages because their medical professionals move abroad. Human Resources for Health reports that more than 25% of doctors trained in Africa have relocated to the US, UK, or Canada. The impact? Countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe struggle with an overburdened healthcare system, where a single doctor may be responsible for thousands of patients. In contrast, their Western counterparts benefit from an influx of experienced, foreign-trained professionals. Another case study: Indian and Chinese engineers in Silicon Valley. A similar pattern plays out in the tech industry. The MIT Economic Review states that Indian and Chinese engineers constitute a substantial share of Silicon Valley's workforce. Countries like India and China produce some of the world's top engineering talent, yet many leave for better-paying jobs in the US. Why? Because the US offers stronger intellectual property protections, access to venture capital, and high salaries. While India and China have booming tech sectors, many professionals see more opportunities abroad. The result? The US dominates global innovation, while developing nations lose talent that could fuel their own industries. When skilled workers leave, it's not just a loss of talent, it's a loss of economic potential. Brain drain weakens industries, drains public resources, and slows down national development. So, can it be stopped? Can developing nations bring their talent back? Or is this a cycle they are doomed to repeat? Brain drain doesn't just affect the workers who leave, it reshapes entire economies. The effects can be felt on both sides. The countries losing talent struggle to recover, while the countries gaining talent grow stronger but face their own challenges. When skilled workers leave, they take more than just their expertise with them. They take tax revenue, innovation, and future economic potential. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) reveals that developing nations lose billions in tax revenue due to the migration of high-income professionals to wealthier countries. These losses limit public investment in healthcare, education, and infrastructure, keeping poorer nations trapped in a cycle of underdevelopment. While poorer nations struggle to replace lost talent, wealthier nations reap the benefits. Harvard Business Review reports that the US, Canada, and the UK have strengthened their economies by attracting highly skilled migrants, particularly in tech, medicine, and engineering. These workers fill labor shortages, increase innovation, and boost economic output. But brain drain also creates challenges for richer nations. The OECD Migration Report highlights how mass migration puts pressure on housing, public services, and infrastructure, driving up costs and creating social tensions in cities like London, Berlin, and New York. Brain drain isn't inevitable, but reversing it takes more than just asking skilled workers to come here. It requires real change, real investment, and real incentives. The first step to stopping brain drain is better salaries and working conditions. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) emphasizes that competitive salaries and career advancement opportunities are essential for retaining skilled workers. If a doctor in Ghana earns a fraction of what they would in the US, the choice to leave becomes obvious. But money alone isn't enough. Transparency International reports that corruption drives skilled workers away just as much as low wages. When promotions are based on connections instead of competence, people take their talents elsewhere. Stronger institutions, anti-corruption measures, and fair hiring practices make staying home a viable option. Some nations are already taking action. China's 1,000 Talents program actively lures back scientists and engineers with lucrative research grants and high-paying positions, according to the MIT Economic Review. Meanwhile, Poland and Romania have introduced tax breaks and financial incentives to encourage workers to return home, as noted by the European Parliament. You see, the real solution to brain drain isn't just higher salaries, it's better institutions. Nations that invest in fair governance, innovation, and economic opportunities keep their brightest minds from leaving. At the end of the day, the difference between rich and poor nations isn't just resources, it's the rules they play by. So, is it possible for struggling nations to rebuild themselves and keep their best talent? Or is the global competition for skilled workers just too strong? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments.